Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the Hebrew infinitive. A normal verb has action. We could say he killed. Remember, we even had learned the Hebrew word for that, katal. Um, an infinitive is like that, but it has that idea just to kill. And so we can describe it as a verbal noun. The infinitive then is like a verb in which it implies some action. When I say to kill, that has some action. But when I said he killed, or he will kill, or he is killing, that's much more of that. It has a verbal stem. It may also take a direct object. I could say to kill a mockingbird, and be modified by other adverbial phrases. So I could say to kill strenuously, to kill secretly, to kill all sorts of things. It may take a negative. I could say to kill or not to kill. Hats off to William Shakespeare. But if so, that will take a slightly different form for the negative. It is also like a noun in that it functions like a noun. It has the idea of its, sort of standing still. It can be the object of a preposition, um, to be killed, or the head of a construct chain. And so I have both the infinitive construct and the infinitive absolute. Now, these are going to be two different. They're not inflected for person, gender, or number. So, when you say to kill, how many people are doing it? Is it masculine or feminine? That's not in the word. Is it me killing? Is it you killing? Just to kill doesn't have any of those. In the infinitive construct, it often occurs with pronominal prefixes and suffixes. When it's an absolute, you can tell it's an absolute because it never utilizes prefixes or suffixes. So if you see prefixes, if you see suffixes, then it is a construct. Now, some uses of the infinitive construct. We'll start with that. First of all, to show purpose, intention, or result when prefixed with the L, with the lamet. And so here's Genesis chapter 42 and verse 9. And notice that our first word is the infinitive construct. Le ra'ot. Ra'ah is the word to see. So this is the infinitive. In order to see, you could just say to see, and then it are ut, the nakedness. Actually, it's the same word that's used in Genesis 2 to describe how the man and the woman were naked. But this is the nakedness of haaretz, of the land. And then notice the rest of the sentence is botem. This is Joseph speaking to his brothers. You guys are spies. You came into the land to see the nakedness of the land. Notice for that purpose, in order to see. And so it's reflecting purpose or intent. Here's another example, also in Genesis, chapter 37 and verse 25, where we read, Vayash, Vayashvu, and they sat down, uh, in order le'akal, in order to eat. That's the le part. Remember, you have the L there. It's in order to eat lechem, in order to eat bread. Now, you not only have purpose, intention, or result, but also it can be inceptive. That is, when prefixed with that same L sound, the infinitive construct can indicate an action that is about to take place. That's a little bit like intention, but it's not necessarily intentional intention. It's something that's going to take place without anybody planning it. And that's the example here in Genesis 15:12. This is where God is approaching Abraham, uh, Vayahi, and it was where it came about, Ha Shemesh, the sun, Lebo. The sun was about to go, and of course we say it was about to go down. That's the way we describe it. The sun was about to disappear. It was going down. It was setting, and the sun isn't intentional about it. The sun's just happening, but it's about to happen, and that's the reflection of the infinitive construct. It can also be a verbal noun, and here we have 1 Samuel chapter 15 and verse 22. Hine, behold, shamoah, and to hear what? Matzo bach, To hear, and notice from sacrifice or then sacrifice tov, to hear is good. And we say is good from sacrifice. That doesn't make any sense. So we would say, behold obedience, because Shema is to hear, but you say, well, doesn't it mean to hear is better than sacrifice? No, it's got the idea that when you're hearing, you are obeying. Did you hear what I said? And the idea is, are you doing it? So that can come with that idea of hearing. Finally, we have the complementary infinitive. This clarifies the preceding action or statement. We have the example of the complementary use of the infinitive construct, Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 6, where we see Vashamarta, and you will keep eth mitzvot, you will keep the commandments of Adonai Eloheka, of the Lord your God. And here's the infinitive construct. Um, la lekim, la leket, by walking. Halak is the verb there. You say, well, what happened to that H sound, that hey in the beginning? That dropped out. It was a guttural, so it didn't like to be there. And so it drops out, and you're supposed to recognize it with just the next two letters, and we do. Notice, and so you'll keep the commandments of the Lord your God by walking. That's one of the ways that you do that. Bi, uh, bid rakau, in his ways. Ul yirah, and by fearing. Yirah is the basic word there, but notice it's the infinitive again. And again, we have that L sound leading into it. So by walking and by fearing, oh, I'm sorry, ot, otu, by walking and fearing him. Now, some other uses of the infinitive construct now. It can be used here. Notice I've changed my two prepositions, ke and be. Those are each prepositions. Ke is to be like something, be is to be in it or on it. And so here we go to Deuteronomy chapter 27 and verse 4, and we read Yaha, and it shall be, here's my infinitive, be'av rakam, when you go, in going, we might say, but it's a construct idea. So in the going, when you, and remember this is temporal, so that's why we're saying when instead of in going. In going, et ha Jordan, in going, when you go over the Jordan, tekimu, you shall raise up, et ha Ebenezer, heth aben, excuse me, et ha benim, and you shall raise up stones. Ha Allah, you shall raise up these stones. Esher anaki mitz of mitzvot, which I myself am commanding. So in this case, notice the infinitive. When you go over, it's saying when that happens, you're going to go. By the way, that word ever in the middle for be'ev rekam, when you go over, ever is, you see that way back in Genesis about those who go over, and you actually got one of the patriarchs named Ever, and we think that's maybe where we get that term Hebrew from, the one who crossed over. So it's, when you go over the Jordan, you're going to raise up stones. We're going to come back and look at that story, the rest of that story in a minute. But this is described in Deuteronomy chapter 27 and verse 54. They were going to be gathering stones and raising them up, and we're going to have further explanation of that when we get to the book of Joshua. We also have the uses. Now we're switching now to the infinitive absolute. It can accompany a verb of the same root to emphasize the meaning. So bayom, this is the word in the day. akolka, in the day you eat, mi me no, in the day you eat from it. This is, of course, Genesis chapter 2, God giving his warning. Mot tamot, dying you will die. Now, I remember hearing a Bible teacher one time saying, see, that's two deaths. You die physically and you die spiritually. And I said, no, 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 no. That's just the infinitive absolute. He was somebody who was claiming to know some Hebrew. I'm not sure that he'd even taken the first lesson in it. It's not dying you will die. Rather, it's describing that it's really going to happen. And so that's the intensification. You're emphasizing that. In the day you eat of it, you're really, the way we translate it, you shall certainly die. You shall surely die. It can also function as an imperative, Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 12. Um, Shamaru, that's in order, notice this, an imperative here, keep eth yom ha-shabbat. Yeah, keep the Sabbath day. And so God's commanding them to do it, and he uses that infinitive to do that. And then you can have two infinitive absolutes, which can appear with a verb in order to describe simultaneous action. Judges chapter 14 and verse 19. Ye va yel ek, that is the idea, and he walked, and what's going to be interesting, and he walked halok, he walked walking. It's the same word. You say, wait a minute, where's that hey? Remember, it dropped out because we have there the imperfect. You say imperfect, wasn't that supposed to be future tense? Well, no, it's the imperfect with the vav, and so that flips it around, and that makes it past tense instead. And so he walking ve okel ve akol, and he walking and eating. And you say, well, was he walking first and then eating? No, this is all happening at the same time. So we render this, and he walked eating as he went. And this is the idea. He's doing all these things at the same time. Bible study time. Two things we want to look at. One is a short little passage in Ruth chapter 4 and verse 1, where Boaz goes to the gate in Bethlehem. Of course, that would not just be an opening in the wall, but that's an actual whole compound that would be the gate assembly. And he says to an individual, it's a close relative, and he's going to acquire the rights for Ruth, and there's a whole story that's developed up to this point. But what we want to look at is just the single word, turn aside, and then the New American Standard translates it, turn aside, friend, sit down here. Now, King James translates it, oh, such a one, turn aside, sit down here. Notice, such a one, friend, the New English translation says, come here and sit down, John Doe. John Doe, where did they get that from? It's because that's sort of a designation that's non-specific. When you don't know somebody's name, sometimes they put down on the paperwork, they don't have a name, so they just put John Doe, and that stands for whoever this person is. I don't know who it is. And then the Tanakh, and I'm going to come back to this one because I think this is actually maybe the most accurate. Come over and sit down here, so-and-so. Now, what is this about this word friend or such a one or John Doe or so-and-so? The Hebrew here, and it's pelune al Monet. And notice how there's a little rhythm to that. It rhymes a little bit. And let me just say, Hebrew poetry doesn't rhyme. Whenever you see a rhyme, it's by way of a pun. So, pilone al Monet, it's sort of a figure of speech, and neither one of those words really mean anything by itself. Um, The term is actually used in 1 Samuel chapter 21, 1, 2. I'm using the King James version because I think they capture the idea where God says, "I've appointed my servants to such and such a place." We're not really even talking about what that place is. Or 2 Kings chapter 6 and verse 8, "In such and such a place shall be my camp," says one of the kings. And you say, well, what place was that? It's not. You don't need to know the location. It's sort of an not unknown to them, but unknown to us, because it's the exact location is insignificant to us. Now there are several examples of two words that go together in English which do not have individual meanings and yet taken collectively carry a similar idea to what we're saying here. When I talk about helter skelter, have you heard that term? And if you're maybe if you're not a natural English speaker, you might not even heard it. It means something that's sort of random. It's helter skelter. It's sort of wishy washy, and that's another term I just made up, but I didn't make it up. It's actually there. Or hocus pocus, something that a magician says. What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. He just says it because the words sort of go together. Or topsy turvy, something that's all mixed up, but you don't use the word topsy without turvy, or vice versa. They only mean something in which you throw them together, and then they don't mean anything all that specific. And so the Tanakh translation, it's a Jewish translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, and it's got some good points. Come over and sit down here, so and so, because here's an individual who he was in the line. He could have taken Ruth to be his wife, and he would have been in the messianic line, but he turned it down. And instead, Boaz, who we never would have heard of any other way, instead, the story of Boaz comes to us, and he he buys into, he gets for himself the possession of Ruth and the possession of the promises of God, and he becomes part of the larger story. And so perhaps there's a little warning, here's someone who is trying to save his own inheritance. We don't even know his name. He's the so-and-so that was more interested in his stuff, and he missed out on God's stuff. Now, the other thing that we want to come to, we mentioned this in Deuteronomy, but we're now coming to Joshua chapter 3 and verse 16. And this is where Joshua is crossing the waters of the Jordan. We read, "The waters which were flowing down from above stood and rose up in one heap a great distance away at Adam." Notice this, when they crossed the Jordan, it's not that the waters separated, the waters upstream stopped. And if the waters upstream stop, then whatever's flowing is going to flow down and it's going to dry out. And the city that is beside Zarathan, that's way up in about halfway up the Jordan as you go up toward the Sea of Galilee. And those which were flowing down toward the Sea of the Arabah, the Salt Sea, were completely cut off, so the people crossed opposite Jericho. Now we have this description of the waters which were flowing down. It's interesting, the description. Hamayim, that's the waters, and then Ha-Yordim, the waters which were flowing down. That sounds a lot like the word Jordan. That's actually what the word Jordan means, to come down from Dan. The word that were flowing down, the flowing waters. And so it was the Jordan waters that were Jordaning down, but that's not what I want to point out. Verse 17, "And the priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel crossed on dry ground, until all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan." Notice they are on dry ground, Baharava, and so notice that term is used twice, on dry ground. On dry ground is the same term that was used back in Genesis 7, verse 22, when it talked about the flood and all that was on the dry land, all in whose nostrils was the breath of lives, of the spirit of life died. It's also used in Exodus 14:21, where the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land. And then it's also used in a way that's not about floods, but just Haggai chapter 2 and verse 6, where this says, Lord of hosts, once and more in a little while, I'm going to shake the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the dry ground. And that term is used in a variety of ways, but also always has that idea. Now, verse 9, then Joshua set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan at the place where the feet of the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing, and they are there to this day. Where did he set them up? The way the New American Standard translates it, it sounds like he set them up in the middle of the Jordan. That's what it says. When I look at the New International Version, it changes it a bit. I think they're trying to be true to what they think the Hebrew is saying. We're going to look at the Hebrew in just a moment. Joshua set up the 12 stones, but notice instead of that we're in the middle of the Jordan, they render it that had been in the middle of the Jordan. Now they're inserting an idea there. The question is that idea there? Or is it a correct change or not? At the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood, and they are there to this day, are the stones in the middle of the Jordan, or are they off to the side? Where are the stones? Here is the Hebrew, and so we have ushtim, and we remember from our numbers lessons, ushtim, uh, uh, Ashrei, 2 and 10, that's 12. In other words, 12 ebenim, 12 stones. Hakim, 12 stones, he caused to be raised. That's the hiphil stem. I don't expect you to know that, but you know what a hiphil is because now we've studied that. And then Yahushua, Yahushua, Joshua, and what he did, Bet Uk, he caused to be raised in the midst Ha Jordan, and we already saw the word Jordan. Notice he caused these stones to be raised in the midst of the Jordan. And then we finish the verse up below the place of Tachat Metzev, below the standing place, Rigle of the feet, and it's of the Kohanim, of the priests, Nishpa, the priests who were lifting, Aaron, Berit, the Ark of the Covenant, Va, Yahu, and they are there. Sham is the word there. They are there. Ad Hayom, they are until the day, Hazeh, until the day of this, in other words, until this day. And so if I just read it for what it says, it sounds very much like that the New American Standard is translating this literally. Now, does that make it correct? Maybe not, maybe so. But I want you to see why they have done that. When we look at the King James, I have the King James down below. It does the same thing. King James tends to be a very literal translation. I like it for that reason. Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests, which bear the Ark of the Covenant, stood, and they are there to this day. Now, this brings up the question. The question comes up, why would they place the stones in the midst of the Jordan? After all, the Jordan's going to rise up again. It's going to be covered. Well, you have to remember that the Jordan is a seasonal river. When Joshua crossed the Jordan, that was in the springtime. That's when the Jordan overflows its banks and everything gets very wet. And when the waters came back after they'd crossed it, I'm sure the stones would have been covered up. But it's a seasonal river. And at times where it gets dry, and about half the year in Israel, it doesn't rain. The summer months, it stops raining at all. And by the time that you get to the end of the summer and you're getting into the fall, you're waiting for any rain to come, and things are getting dry, and they're really having to trust in the Lord. And at such a time, the waters of the Jordan actually begin to go down. They begin to dry up. And it doesn't disappear completely, but they go way down. And at such a time, these stones that are a reminder of God's faithfulness, they are now going to become visible, so that at the time when they need to trust the Lord for the coming rains, there will be the stones that are a reminder of God's faithfulness, and they'll see that reminder and they will know to trust the Lord even in the dry times. Now, here's the closing question. Do you have any stones that serve as a reminder to hope and trust in the Lord, even in your dry times? Make for yourself a reminder, that which God has done in the past, to remind you. The scriptures can be a reminder like that. They can be our stone of hope, the stone of remembrance, the stone that reminds us to trust in the Lord.